You know, history, it often presents us with these perfectly polished statues of its greatest minds. We see figures of unassailable intellect staring out at us with this serene, almost omniscient wisdom. But long before the Nobel Prizes, long before those mind-bending theories that literally redefined the very fabric of space and time, there was just a boy. A quiet, deeply contemplative boy who found himself entirely out of step with the rhythm of the world around him. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're not going to look at the finished icon. We're delving into the deep, philosophical roots of a young rebel. We are going to trace the dramatic, slow-paced awakening of a mind that simply refused to be contained. But before we journey further into the shadows of the 19th century, let's ground ourselves for just a moment. The historical sources, the letters, the meticulously recorded accounts that we'll analyze in this explainer, they are utilized under fair use. For us, this is a profound commitment to the preservation of our shared history and the educational exploration of past minds. Because it's truly through these scattered fragments of the past that we can actually begin to reconstruct the genesis of genius. So let's dive right into this with a question that's going to echo through every single moment of the life we're about to examine. Is genius born of compliance or defiance? We are so deeply conditioned to believe that success is just the product of following the rules, right? Of adapting to the systems built by those who came before us. But what if true world-altering brilliance requires exactly the opposite? Let that question just hang in the air for a second. I want you to challenge your preconceived notions of authority today. Because the story of Albert Einstein is, at its absolute core, a story of pure defiance. Part 1. The Seeds of Curiosity. Our chronological journey begins back in 1879. Albert was born in Ulm, but the soil where his mind truly began to take root was Munich. His father and uncle actually moved the family there in 1880 to establish an electrical manufacturing company. Just picture the rapidly modernizing environment of his childhood home, humming with the quiet tension of brand new technologies. It was here, when Einstein was just 5 years old and sick in bed, that his father handed him a simple pocket compass. Now, to most kids, that's a fleeting distraction. But young Albert, he was utterly mesmerized. There was the scene, a simple metal compass needle trapped in its little case. And then there was the unseen, the invisible magnetic force directing it, pulling it inexorably toward the north, no matter how the boy twisted or turned to the casing. This one single occurrence sparked a lifelong existential quest for him. He realized, with this almost haunting chill of awe, that there absolutely must be deeply hidden, unseen forces governing the mechanics of the universe. So while other children were out playing, Albert was embarking on this incredibly intense, self-directed intellectual awakening. By the time he was just 12 years old, he had taught himself and completely mastered differential and integral calculus. But we have to remember he wasn't just some cold calculating machine. By age 14, he was diving into Immanuel Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, which is one of the most dense metaphysical texts ever written, probing the very nature of reality itself. And entirely intertwined with this rigorous logic was a profound, almost spiritual resonance with music. He started playing the violin at age 6, accompanied by his mother on the piano. When he listened to the sonatas of Mozart, Einstein perceived an underlying beautiful order to the cosmos. For him, science, philosophy, and art, they weren't separate subjects. They were just different languages speaking the exact same universal truth. Part 2. Clash with the Machine. Well, this expansive, free-flowing universe inside Albert's mind was about to collide violently with the harsh physical reality of 19th century Germany. At age 9, he was enrolled in the loopholed Gymnasium in Munich, and the atmosphere there was heavy, it was rigid, and it was deeply oppressive. The defining mechanism of this environment was rote learning. You see, the Prussian education system at the time was essentially a highly disciplined machine. It relied almost entirely on strict repetition and memorization, utterly devoid of any creative inquiry. For a boy who saw invisible forces and heard the mathematical harmony of Mozart, this environment was literally suffocating. The system didn't want to understand the universe, it just wanted to categorize it and force young minds to parrot those categories back without a single question. It was a method that deliberately attempted to mold and effectively crush his independent spirit. This fundamental friction caused immense psychological strain on him. As historical accounts clearly note, he chafed at the strict discipline and the lack of freedom for any creative thought. There was this agonizing friction between Einstein's boundless imagination and the institutional authorities. His teachers honestly viewed him as a defiant, inadequate student simply because he refused to just memorize and obey. It's like a square peg being hammered relentlessly into a round hole, and the psychological toll on this young philosopher was absolutely massive. Before we follow Albert across the Alps to escape this intellectual prison, I want to sincerely pause our narrative for just a moment. If you are captivated by these deep dives into the unvarnished truths of history's greatest minds, I invite you to subscribe to @FamousLivesBio. We'd love for you to join us in this ongoing exploration of legendary lives as we strip away the myth and examine the raw, human struggles that actually forged them. Your support is what allows us to keep bringing these vital stories to light.
Part 3. Escape to Italy.
The ultimate breaking point arrived in 1894. His family's electrical business faced a catastrophic failure, largely because the new supremacy of alternating current completely wiped out the demand for their direct current technology. With literally no income, his parents were forced to seek a new life down in northern Italy, leaving a 15-year-old Albert behind in Munich to finish his schooling. So there he was, alone in a boarding house, subjected to the rigid, militaristic discipline of the Gymnasium. He was utterly miserable. But he didn't surrender. In late 1894, using a doctor's note claiming nervous exhaustion, he boldly abandoned his strict schooling. He just packed his bags and, in the dead of winter, crossed the Alps to reunite with his family in Italy. He was finally reclaiming his freedom.
Part 4. The Stateless Wonder.
Once in Italy, that suffocating cloud of Prussian discipline finally lifted. In Pavia, Albert thrived. Without the constant burden of rote memorization, his intellect just exploded. He started doing these incredibly complex calculations for his uncle Jakob's arc-light improvements that completely astounded the family. He was proving undeniably that his mind thrived outside the traditional classroom. But, as we know, even a genius encounters institutional barriers. Aware of his incredible potential, his family sent him to take the entrance exams for the prestigious Swiss Federal Polytechnic in Zurich. He was only 16 at the time, and guess what? He failed the general portion of the exam, subjects like literature and politics that he simply hadn't cared to memorize. But his exceptional grades in physics and mathematics were so breathtakingly undeniable that the university had to take notice. So they advised him to finish his secondary education at the Argovian Cantonal School in Aarau, Switzerland, to prepare for automatic admission the very next year. While living in Switzerland, Einstein made a decision of staggering philosophical weight. And it brings us to a crucial question. Why would a 16-year-old boy actually choose to be stateless? I really want you to pause and heavily consider the sheer magnitude of a teenager willingly walking into a government office and legally stripping away his own national identity. It is an act of profound alienation, sure, but also profound self-determination. The answer to that lies in his absolute rejection of the machine that tried to crush him. In January of 1896, with his father's permission, Albert officially renounced his German citizenship. He knew full well that if he remained a citizen, he would soon face compulsory military service, which to him was the ultimate manifestation of blind nationalism, violence, and systemic control that he so deeply despised. By intentionally making himself stateless, remaining without a country for several years, he willingly paid the price for ultimate freedom. He literally became a nomad of intellect. This incredibly bold moment marks the true genesis of his identity as a universal thinker, a citizen of the cosmos, rather than any one nation.
Part 5. A Genius Unleashed. His time at the school in Aarau was an absolute revelation. It was an environment built entirely on independent thought and conceptual understanding. Literally, the exact antithesis of the Munich Gymnasium. Under this nurturing environment, the culmination of his early rebellion really bore fruit. He graduated achieving the highest marks overall in his class with the absolute best grades in mathematics and physics. The constraints were finally gone. The genius was unleashed. And so we arrive at the autumn of 1896. This stateless 17-year-old rebel, carrying the heavy weight of philosophical inquiry and the scars of a rigid educational machine, finally crossed the threshold into the Swiss Federal Polytechnic in Zurich. He was officially enrolled in the 4-year teaching diploma program in physics and mathematics. He was finally exactly where he needed to be, armed with a mind fully ready to deconstruct and rebuild the universe. We began this explainer by asking if genius is born of compliance or defiance. As we look back at the early life of Albert Einstein, I think the answer is etched into his very being. He refused to memorize without understanding. He refused to remain in a school that stifled his spirit. He even refused to belong to a nation that demanded his submission to militarism. In a world that endlessly demands our compliance, perhaps the most profound act of genius
is simply refusing to obey. Thank you for exploring this remarkable mind with me. Until next time, keep questioning the seen and searching for the unseen.